Hi. Well, today I want to talk about the founding fathers and their common basic beliefs. The leadership in Washington that we have today on both sides of the political aisle has veered so far away from what the founding fathers intended this country to be. It's ridiculous. And I'm not saying anything right now that none of you are aware of. I think that in a basic sense, we all know and can feel that what's happening now is directly and profoundly opposite of what the founding fathers intended the leadership of this country to be. So I think that what we need to do is remind ourselves of the commonality of the basic beliefs of the founding fathers in order for us to understand why the leadership in Washington has veered so far from their example of what political leadership should be. You see, the founders came from massively various backgrounds, but their fundamental beliefs were virtually identical. They argued bitterly over the most practical plan of implementing those beliefs, but they rarely, if ever, argued about their final objective or their basic convictions. They came from several different churches, and some came from no church at all, but all of them were religious in the sense that they believed in God and His natural law. So how then do we explain their amazing unanimity and fundamental beliefs? I think that one reason is that they were all very well read, and mostly from the same books. The founders had a broad knowledge of religious, political, historical, economic, and philosophical studies, and their writings were peppered. I mean, they were filled with the thoughts of people like Polybius, with Cicero, Thomas Hooker, Coke, Montesquieu, Blackstone, John Locke, and Adam Smith. And they were also, and listen to this carefully, they were careful students of the Bible, especially the Old Testament. And even though some didn't belong to the Christian tradition, the teachings of Jesus were held in universal respect and admiration. And what we have today, especially in the liberal Democratic Party, is a leadership base that peppers their writings and philosophies with the likes of Mao Zedong, Stalin, Lenin, Hitler, Chavez, and Castro. The Bible and teachings of the Old Testament, not to mention Jesus himself, are considered contraband. They've actually tried to get those out completely of the public domain, when the Founding Fathers desperately saw the value of having them included. And the whole idea of separation of church and state, which is a topic for another day, has been misguided and misinterpreted since basically the time of Woodrow Wilson. And we're going to get back to that. And we're going to talk about that in another time and another day. But these fundamental principles, the fundamental principles that the Founding Fathers had, and the uniformity of that fundamental thought was held in common by them, and it included a strong and unusually well-defined conviction concerning religious principles, political precepts, economic fundamentals, and long-range social goals. On particulars, yes, they quarreled. But when discussing fundamental precepts and ultimate objectives, they were unanimous. They even had strong criticisms of one another as personalities. For example, John Adams had huge personality conflicts with Benjamin Franklin, but Adams' writings are filled and steeped full of accolades for Franklin. One of George Washington's most vehement critics was Dr. Benjamin Rush, yet this Pennsylvania doctor boldly supported Washington and worked and fought for whatever Washington worked and fought for. Today, we have a president and members of the Democratic Party who go out of their way to blame their predecessors, to cast aspersions on those in office today who don't agree with them. And if you or I or any member of the media or the public don't agree with them, we're crucified. We're somehow labeled things such as racist or unthinking or uneducated. It's ridiculous. The only way to describe it is they're just rude. Well, it wasn't like that in the days of the Founding Fathers. There was a certain decorum that was present that we've lost through time. But let me get back to the principles. The founding fathers believed in many, many principles, and I want to talk about a few of them in this series. The first one today, the first principle that we have to begin with in regards to the founding fathers, is that they believed that the only reliable basis for sound government and just human relations is natural law. Now, most of us alive today have never studied natural law, much less heard of it. If we were able to take the time to actually study the founding fathers, we would see that they reference it continuously. So, what is natural law? A good place to begin is in the writings of one of the American founders' favorite authors, Marcus Tullius Cicero. Cicero. It was Cicero who cut through the political BS of the time, who cut through what Plato and Aristotle were saying about politics and philosophy to discover the touchstone for good laws and sound government and the long-range formula for happy human relationships. In the founders' roster of great political thinkers, Cicero is high on the list. To Cicero, the building of a society on principles of natural law is simply recognizing the rules of right conduct with which the rules of the supreme creator of the universe are in alignment. Even in the time of pagans, there was the ability of a person like Cicero with sharp, penetrating minds who could reason their way through the maze of this natural phenomenon, critics and peer pressure, paganism, to understand, to see behind and understand the cosmic flow of things, as well as understanding the unfolding of their own life within this universe. So in this cosmic universe that Cicero was trying to understand and enlighten himself and others about, there is, as he discovered, a brilliant intelligence of a supreme designer with an ongoing interest, I might add, in both human and cosmic affairs. And Cicero's ability and his honesty caused him to conclude that once the reality of the Creator is clear and identified in our mind, the only intelligent approach to government, to justice, and human relationships is in terms of the laws which the Supreme Creator has already established. The Creator's order of things is called natural law. And a fundamental presupposition of natural law is that man shares with his Creator a quality of utilizing a rational approach to solving problems, and the reasoning of the mind will generally lead to common sense conclusions based on what Thomas Jefferson called the laws of nature and of nature's God. And that, my friends, is a quote directly taken from the Declaration of Independence. So now we have to consider the major precepts of natural law which profoundly impressed the founding fathers in order to understand why we're so far off track. Another precept is that natural law is eternal and universal. You see, first of all, Cicero defines natural law as true law. And then he says this, and I quote, "The true law is right reason in agreement with nature. It is of universal application, unchanging and everlasting. It summons to duty by its commands and averts from wrongdoing by its prohibitions. It is a sin to try to alter this law, nor is it allowable to repeal entirely. We cannot be freed from its obligations by Senate or people, and we need not look outside ourselves for an expounder or an interpreter of it. And there will not be different laws now and in the future, but one eternal and unchangeable law will be valid for all nations and all times. And there will be one master and ruler, that is God, over us all. For he is the author of this law, its promulgator, and its enforcing judge. Whoever is disobedient is fleeting from himself and denying his human nature, and by reason of this very fact, he will suffer the worst punishment." Those were Cicero's own words. And in these few lines are concepts that the founders used 1,000 times. The law of nature or of nature's God is eternal in its basic goodness. It's universal in its application. It's a code of right reason from the Creator himself. It cannot be altered. It cannot be repealed. It cannot be abandoned by legislature or the people themselves, even though they may pretend to do so. In natural law, we're dealing with factors of absolute reality. It's basic in its principles, it's comprehensible to the human mind, and totally correct and morally right in its operation. To the founding fathers, as well as to people like Blackstone, John Locke, Montesquieu, and Cicero himself, this was a monumental discovery. In our next section, we're going to talk about another basic principle, the divine gift of reason.